Now, a while ago I ranted about how balance is boring, and I hold to that, but in this week's video I'm going to teach you the most important things I think that actually should be balanced in a tabletop role-playing game, and how to go about balancing them. Hi, I'm Peter, creator and lead designer of Tales from Elsewhere, and I've been playing TTRPGs for 26 years now, and through that time I've played a lot of games and homebrewed a lot and even designed my own game. And through that experience I've seen a lot of very poorly designed content. So this video is going to be one of my little Excalibur lectures where we'll work through what I think are the best practices for balancing your homebrew content for things like D&D or when creating your own TTRPG. So let's hop into Excalibur and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Now, the purpose of this video is not to retread the subject of why balance may or may not matter. I'll put a link down below to my previous video where I argue against overemphasizing balance that I think some designers get a little obsessed about. But let's work through what I think are the two primary vectors that you need to attack to keep your game balanced. All right, the two vectors of balance that I think are vital are playing the game and breaking the scope. And let's unpack what I mean by each of these. So playing the game is aspects of gameplay, of systems, of mechanics that influence a player's ability to play the game itself. And these come in a couple varieties. One is action economy. This is one of the most unbalanced things in a lot of TTRPGs, and you'll know what I'm talking about right away, I think, if you've played D&D 5th edition or 5.5. There's a reason why that 2-level fighter dip was in like every optimized build, particularly for spellcasters, because things that let you do more during your turn unbalance the game rapidly. What you are able to do during the spotlight time that a player has, when it's their turn in combat or whatever that may be, expanding that is a quick way to have a player feel like they get to do so much more than everyone else. Because you see, not only is increased action economy very powerful mechanically, but it also results in some players feeling like they get to play more of the game than others, and that's no fun. The other aspect that affects people's ability to play the game are structures and mechanics that deny others' ability to play the game, and I'm including the GM as a player in this case. So these are features that deny other players the ability to act or limit their actions or take away their agency. For example, if the players have a lot of features that like mass stun enemies, that dramatically impacts the GM's ability to play the game and are extremely powerful. They're denying the action economy of others. If there are for some reason features that allow a player to deny the actions of other players, that's even worse, of course, because now you're taking away intra-party agency. But this can lead to extremely stale and unfun feeling scenarios when certain people just get locked out of participating in the game you're all there to play. Now, related to these two, we have the third item within this category, which is called hogging the spotlight. Now, this is related to action economy and even denying others, but I'd like to unpack what's distinct about it. Hogging the spotlight can happen because a certain type of character or set of features causes that player's turn to take longer. The amount of procedures they have to go through, the steps involved to resolve their actions, ends up meaning that they are playing the game for longer stretches than another, even if their exact action economy isn't very different. A common way this happens is with magic. You know, the classic situation in a game like D&D or a lot of D20 fantasy is the warrior walks up to an enemy and swings their sword once, they deal damage or they don't, and their turn ends. Then you have a magic character that gets to pick from all sorts of different abilities, and resolving that ability is a multi-step process with different decision points and possibly causing rolls for the enemy, like saving throws. That's increasing the procedural nature of that player's turn, and therefore it takes longer. They're getting to play the game for longer. Similarly, if you're giving characters the ability to solve a variety of problems, especially if they're solving all problems, they're hogging the spotlight more. This is also very common in a lot of heroic fantasy, where folks will make the magic users able to solve a huge variety of problems, while the martial characters really can just swing their sword or shoot their bow. This causes the magical characters to occupy more spotlight in the narrative, leaving combat even aside. The magic characters, they are the star of the show more frequently because they're more regularly solving problems that only they can solve. Now, it's important to note on that last subject that I believe that characters should feel unique from each other. The players should feel distinct and have distinct play styles and feel like they have a niche that they excel at. So it's okay for when the spotlight goes on the rogue for them to be the one to pick the locks and disarm the traps, right? That's the thing they're good at. While, when there's a bunch of beasties to slay, if the warrior with their great axe is the one that really has that spotlight on them to slay the monsters, that's also good. But it's when a single character has access to the solution to a lot of problems that you start to see this, right? Characters should feel distinct with no one feeling like they can handle it all themselves. That is an imbalance in spotlight. See what I'm saying? And now, looking at these playing the game aspects, I think those of you who watch my channel know I do love D&D and I play it all the time, but these three features are something that are a big problem within the current edition of D&D, that we have a lot of action economy abuse with things like Action Surge, and that being extremely powerful. Some characters getting to attack more than others, and one of the most powerful types of builds is layering on as many extra attacks as possible. We have a lot of denying of other players' actions, whether that be monsters that incapacitate players or players that incapacitate monsters. This is removing gameplay elements. And you have a lot of spotlight hogging. When you have characters that are so simple and stay so simple as things like the fighter or the barbarian, then characters like the wizard, who eventually solve almost all problems, or the druid, that there's a spotlight hogging that is an imbalance in narrative. And it's a problem that D&D has had for a long time. So when you're working on your tabletop role-playing game, pay very close attention to these aspects of playing the game. So be careful of your action economy abuses. Be careful of how much disabling of other players occurs and their actions, their economy, and their agency. And make sure that there aren't characters that can solve all problems or take a lot longer to do their stuff. So breaking scope is going to require some unpacking. We need to talk about what is the scope and how do you break it. So within any TTRPG, you are going to have an evocation, an idea, a scope of what the players are capable of doing. In a game like Call of Cthulhu, the players may have access to some strange rituals they could do, but they're mostly just random people in the world. You know, they might be able to shoot a gun okay, but there's still no match for the mythos creatures they face. In a game like Brindlewood Bay, you're just these, little old ladies solving murder mysteries, and that's the scope of the fiction of these characters. In a game like Draw Steel or Daggerheart or D&D 5e, the characters are super heroic in many ways, and this defines the scope of what a character should represent. And something breaks the scope when a feature goes out of those bounds, both narratively and mechanically. A great example would be if you're playing Brindlewood Bay and you want to homebrew some new moves to be added to the game because it's powered by the apocalypse. And so you add one where Granny can, fly through the air and shoot lasers from her eyes. That's both mechanically and narratively out of the scope of that game. And it's not really whether or not that's more powerful than what they can normally do per se, but it breaks the fiction that it's attempting to accomplish. And when you have a game of power progression, like, say, D&D, Daggerheart, Draw Steel, you have different scopes depending on their level, right? A level 1 character in D&D 5.5 shouldn't have any feature that lets them deal 8d6 damage with a first level spell slot, right? That's breaking the power scope of what the character is supposed to represent. And you'll find examples of this all the time where one character is allowed to go beyond what the reality bar is that all the other characters seem to be adhering to. And y'all know I have this whole like Marshall versus Caster divide pet peeve, so an example of that is, you see this all the time in online discussions, where people who try to posit that the Marshall character should be able to accomplish wondrous things, they're like, but that doesn't make sense, right? That breaks my immersion, that's too anime. But then at the same time, you have like the wizards literally re-sculpting reality and summoning demons, and the clerics beseeching a god to divert a river, where these other people are held to a more expanded scope of reality than others. That is an imbalance in scope. Some are being held to a more mundane and grounded understanding of a world, while others are allowed to be more wondrous. That is an imbalance of scope. So when you're building features and your player character abilities or classes or whatever it needs to be, start out by thinking, what are the bounds I'd like for the scope of these characters? What sort of problems do I want them to be able to easily solve or not solve at all? For example, you could be intentional, like in Shadowdark, with not giving the players dark vision. A purposeful scope limitation in that game is that the darkness is always oppressive and is a problem to solve intentionally. You need to bring your torches and use the fun timer mechanic and so forth. So if you're homebrewing something from Shadowdark, adding a feature that allows them to ignore that darkness is breaking the character limitations built into the game's design. And you saw this with the introduction of the Aarakocra in D&D 5e, or, when you're adding something that lets a player fly from level 1, basically at will, that's breaking the expected scope of what characters at tier 1, levels 1 through 4 or 5, should be able to accomplish. And doing so has significant balance ramifications. Now, we're not here to dig into whether or not Aarakocra should be banned, it's a whole separate thing, but they are breaking the scope that we would expect. And that is a form of unbalance. Whether or not it's overpowered isn't really the question. It creates an imbalance in character expectation. And these lessons I'm explaining here were hard learned by me because in my TTRPG, Tales from Elsewhere Clockworld, there are 133 edges, special features like feats almost, or discrete class features, that had to be balanced against each other. I don't have any classes in my game, and so all these permutations of all these different features can really add up. But from the very beginning, I had a very good idea of what my scope would be for these characters, and I knew that I needed to pay attention to very particular aspects of balance. I knew that I wasn't going to ever perfectly balance all these different features against one another so that the expected lethality of each character is roughly going to be the same. That'd be a whole separate video I want to do about the nature of my game and how it's actually easier to balance than normal. But I knew that if I focused in on action economy, and spotlight and hogging the problem-solving ability, keeping scope in check, it would be balanced enough. Because I don't need a razor-sharp balanced experience like I'm making a MOBA or an MMORPG. I just need all these different options to feel cool and to not break out of the intended scope. And these are really all I think are the most important aspects to balance. Now, different games are going to have different rules that need to be approached differently, but I think high level, these key points are all you really need to hone in on to make the game sufficiently balanced to be enjoyable. There's going to be other aspects, sure, that if you're making a super crunchy game that's based on Pathfinder, you're going to need a lot more math involved in your balance, but as long as these aspects are mostly kept in line, I think you'll be on your way. As always, I hope you found that interesting. If you'd like to continue the conversation, consider commenting down below, hitting like and subscribe, or even joining the TFE Discord server. We have daily discussions about various aspects of TTRPG design in there. It is really active. And so if you'd like to chat with me more, consider hopping in there. Or if you'd like to see even more videos and game design things from me, consider joining the Patreon, where I release small RPGs, homebrew content, and additional lectures very frequently. So links to all that down below. All right, thanks for watching, and I'll see you here next time on Tales from Elsewhere.